Every time there's a shocking act of violence, the same explanation gets tossed around. It must be mental illness. Politicians say it, news anchors repeat it, and everyday people pass it along. But here's the truth. The idea isn't just wrong, it's dangerous. And with the recent executive orders from President Trump targeting homelessness and mental illness, it's more urgent than ever that we set the record straight. Hi, I'm Dr. Brinen. I'm a psychologist and a co-creator of recovery-oriented cognitive therapy. On this channel, we break down the science about recovery. And today, we're going to tackle one of the most dangerous myths that's out there. The myth that there's a link between psychosis and violence. Think about the language people use all the time. He's a psycho, she's crazy, that's delusional. These aren't just throwaway insults, but they feed into a much larger system. A story that our society's been telling, that people with psychosis, with labels like schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, and other schizophrenia spectrum diagnoses are violent, unpredictable, and dangerous. And because most people believe that they've never met somebody with psychosis, it's easy to turn these people into the boogeyman. Easy to blame them, easy to fear them, and easy to let other people legislate against them. But here's our first big problem. It's simply not true. In my book, Living Well with Psychosis, I dig into this myth, and the data is clear. People with psychosis are far more likely to be injured by other people and be the victims of violence than ever to perpetrate violence themselves. When violence does happen, the risk factors look the same as they do for anyone else. Presence of strong emotions, drug misuse, poverty, early trauma, unemployment, unsafe environment. In fact, when you statistically control for drug misuse, the link between psychosis and violence disappears. But take a moment and think about it logically. Put yourself into the shoes of an individual experiencing psychosis. If you were hearing threatening voices or you were feeling unsafe yourself, your instinct wouldn't be to attack, it would be to hide, it would be to retreat. Most people with psychosis are doing what any of us would do. They're trying to survive, not to harm. So you may be asking, who gets harmed when we spread stigma? And I'd argue a lot of people. First, the individuals themselves. They hear politicians, reporters, even coworkers talking about them as though they're dangerous. Could you imagine walking through the world and hearing people talk about you as though you were a danger? Over time, you might start wondering if that's true, and you might start feeling like you're living under siege all the time. Second, families and loved ones. Imagine sitting in a hospital and finding out that your child or your loved one was diagnosed with psychosis. And all you'd heard from the news and from people around you was that these individuals were dangerous and that they couldn't get better. How scared would you feel in that moment when you're already feeling scared? You might feel hopeless, and this might make treatment feel harder and more difficult. This is unfair to anybody. And finally, I argue all of us. When we scapegoat violence onto those with mental illness, we aim at the wrong target, so we're not likely to solve our concerns around violence. We just fuel our fear, and worse, we lose out on the creativity, resilience, humanity, and beauty of people living well with psychosis in recovery, because stigma pushes them further and further into the shadows out of fear. And now, stigma is being written into policy. These recent executive orders by President Trump treat homelessness and mental illness as a threat to be contained. But executive actions built on fear don't solve anything. They criminalize poverty, they criminalize illness, but they leave the real drivers of violence untouched: inequality, poverty, and access to weapons. But this isn't new for this administration. Before this, they pushed to make Medicaid harder to access, which would strip individuals of their treatment and of their medications. If they do, they'll lose their coverage, they'll lose their stability, and ultimately could become unhoused, setting up a system for people to slip from recovery into homelessness. And then with these new orders, get swept into institutions. A horrible return to a horrible time. I can't say it's intentional, but if it isn't, it sure is coordinated. So if we're interested in violence and helping individuals with serious mental illness, so what actually works? If we want to support healthier communities and we want to address violence, here's where we need to be putting our energy. 1, if we care about mental illness, we need to invest in treatment. We have effective treatments for serious mental illness, treatments like cognitive behavioral therapy for psychosis. We should be scaling up access, not building more holding cells and re-institutionalizing people. 2, research. Funding mental health research helps us discover new and better solutions. But good research is driven by the scientists. Cutting the funding based off of personal gripes and personal desires keeps us in the dark, and proposing unfounded solutions based off of small studies and case examples diverts recovery efforts. 3. Fund early childhood education. Programs like Head Start break cycles of poverty and trauma for both the children and the families that are served by Head Start. There are decades of research supporting the impact of Head Starts on communities, so it directly addresses the root causes of violence. 4. Fund public health. Medicaid and community health programs give people care before it becomes a crisis. That's not just compassionate, that's smart prevention. In summary, everything that I'm describing is currently under attack or being cut. You care about the violence epidemic. I do too. But blaming serious mental illness is misdirection. It divides us and we don't solve the problem. It's like taking an aspirin for a broken leg. Wrong target, wrong solution. Instead, let's demand real answers. Let's stop spreading stigma and let's invest in what actually works. Treatment, research, early childhood education, and public health. So the next time you hear someone blaming mental health after a tragedy, speak up. Because if you see something, say something. Thanks for watching. If you found this helpful, share it. Leave a comment with a blue heart at the end to let me know that you watched this all the way through to the end of the video. And let's change this conversation together. Check out my blog on violence and psychosis. The link is in the description below. And get your copy of Living Well with Psychosis to get a deeper understanding and be an ally. Thanks for watching and be well.